from Wes Clark, who is on the correction line. You probably don't know where, Ben knows where it is. And I went over there and looked, so did staff. Brian's probably on the line and he knows what I'm talking about. But, Brian, do you want to just, sorry to throw you there, but do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, I do.
Do you want to just go over the staff's findings? I've got your email here too, but.
I'd have to pull it up, but I believe our investigation, there was a broken fence post out at on the question property. I believe it was West Clark.
Yeah.
I could be mistaken by that one, but our determination that it was only one fence post that was broken. I believe what we had thought was that, or what Mr. Clark had said is that he thought it was a grader, or I think it was a grader that may have clipped it and knocked that fence post down, but we don't think that was the case. But that was just our findings. So
yeah. It would have to be a grader blade or a snowplow blade, but the snowplows don't go that, so it had to have been a grader blade, and there's no tracks in the ditch, so that would mean it would have to be a grader blade because
He'd had to have been off his working surface with the grader even to...
No, but the wing that they put out to clear the snow from the ditches.
Yeah, but if it's there's a difference. So if it's a grader doing grader work, or if it's a snowplow, because we've gone through this in the past, and snowplows, if your fence is close enough that they take it off with their wing.
This is off of the county property line. The property line actually is, the fence is cornered, so it's in the landowner's title.
Yeah, I know. That, to me, that we still, over the years, we've dealt with that. If it's close enough that the snowplow hits it with a wing while they're clearing snow, keeping the roads clean.
So the only issue I have with it is, well, first, there's actually 2 broken fence posts. As you can see in the picture, the very bottom is pulled off and then the other one's split in half, which the only piece of machinery that can do that is a grader. It cuts, it hits it and then peels half of it off. There's no, Wes Clark was told it was a truck or something ran into the fence. There's no way a truck would just take the top rail off and split the one post down the middle. And there's no reason for a grader to go to turn around there because it's a road allowance, undeveloped road allowance. So he had to have been parked there and then went forward.
So usually in that case, what council has done in the past is if there's any doubt over any of it, we just turn it over to our insurance company. They deal with it.
For consistency, that is.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
For consistency, that is what I have told other ratepayers in the county, is just that if they have a concern that there was potential county caused damage, that they can make a claim through insurance, and then, because we're not in a position to evaluate the incident, but the insurance company, they're experts at that. And so
I wouldn't call them
I do think it's important we maintain consistency.
No, that's fine. I just told Wes I'd bring it up. I will tell him to get a hold of our insurance company then.
The rationale I use for ratepayers when I'm talking to them is it actually mitigates potential fiscal impact to them as a taxpayer, because if we're dealing with everything consistently.
Just put a motion on the floor to turn it over to the insurance company, and then it's on record that that's what we did with it.
But if the grader operator says he didn't do it.
That's up to the insurance company.
None of that, yeah. We don't have to get into that because the insurance company would do the investigation.
Been a lot of talk about UFOs lately, though, too, so let's not rule that out. And I'm sure the insurance companies will probably work that into their equation.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
We should almost set up a process for this, I'm thinking. Because there's a lot of this, I get it quite often, and we always bring it here, but we should almost have a set process that we set up.
Yeah, and I get a lot of calls on snow bringing fence down, but I tell them, well, that's nothing we can do. Snow, our job is to clear the road. But this is obviously, we broke something on their property with a machine
We
because
get-
snow wouldn't bring down a rail fence.
We get that
Potentially.
with big
Like,
rocks
we don't
on
know
the
what
road
happened.
and different things like that, and it's, the insurance company changed, Brian can correct me on this, I think they changed their policy a few years ago. We refer to the insurance company, and they look at it, and anything under a certain amount, they either pay it out or they say, if they think there's anything, they don't take it into great depth if it's only minor dollars, but we don't have to deal with it here.
And for me, that's the key element,
good
is
with
just
that.
that it's dealt with consistently, so that there's no, like, not one ratepayer saying, well, the county, did X. It's always always handled at arm's reach rather than a council decision, which could be perceived as subjective or whatever.
I'll make a motion to this. Oh, go ahead, Brian.
No, sorry. I have nothing to say. Thank you.
I'll make a motion to turn this incident over to our insurance company.
We could just accept for information and, yeah. From a process, I think we wouldn't necessarily turn it over. I think it would be the ratepayer's responsibility to,
No, it's a complaint to us. We just forward it to our insurance company, and they follow through from there.
I'll leave that motion on the table.
okay. Does administration,
If I could, sorry, have some clarity on the motion. Is it for Wheatland County to refer matter to the insurance company?
Yes.
does administration have any comments on the motion?
No, we will proceed if it passes. Thank you.
So the reason I was asking about setting up a way to do this, because sometimes by the time we get involved in it and we see pictures, they could have been, we don't know, it's not date stamped or anything like that. So I'm thinking if we get something where as soon as this get complaint, maybe it already is this way, I don't know, but there's some pictures taken and then that can go to insurance company. It's hard to go 3-4 months later and decide who did what. There needs to have some background information on it. That's all I'm trying to think of, because in my previous life, I kind of did the superintendent role, and I did take an accident and incident investigation course. There's lots of them out there, and there's a whole process that you follow, and then if it gets changed to insurance companies, you just take that file and hand it over to them. So you're not really the judgment on it. You're just you have that information when needed.
Yes, and what I was thinking of doing is I can work with Tracy, and we can get something presented to council at the next council meeting, just a general process and like what kind of first steps that the council should take if they do receive a complaint, and we can go from there and just present that as information.
Perfect.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Maybe just put a motion on the floor, Deputy Reeve Clausen, just so that it's documented, and then just directing administration to develop a procedure for council to follow with
Did you call
potential.
the vote on mine? Sorry.
Oh, no, we didn't, sorry. Oh, wait.
Call the vote first.
Any further discussion or any discussion on Councillor Wilson's motion? Sorry. Is any councillor opposed? Motion is carried.
Brian, sorry, just to jump in before Scott makes his motion, would you be able to just send Wes Clark a confirmation that that'll happen?
Yes, absolutely.
Thanks. I will too, but better that we both do.
A
On his,
potential
you have his email. Sorry.
motion arising for Deputy Reeve Clausen to consider could be to direct administration to draft a procedure for council to consider regarding follow-up with ratepayer complaints for potential damages to ratepayer property.
Sounds good. I'll make that motion.
Unless administration has anything they would recommend for better wording.
Nope, we can follow that. Thank you.
Any discussion or questions on the motion? Is anyone opposed? Motion is carried. We'll move to 2.47, National Indigenous Peoples' Day Proclamation. I would ask council to consider proclaiming June 21st as National Indigenous Peoples' Day. And it would be, as discussed previously, just recognizing the history and culture and way of life of the Indigenous people. We did do this in previous years, so I did not circulate background information regarding the proclamation. I assumed that council made an informed decision when we proclaimed this last year. Any questions or discussion?
Sorry, did you make that as a motion?
I will move that. Sorry. Yes.
You're just following the previous year, what we've done in the past. You're just following along with what we've done in the past. It's not something new.
Yeah, we did it last year. We did it on our social media. I did last year engage, or it might have been 2 years ago. I don't think I did engage in real life activities last year, but there have been activities. The town of Strathmore hosted one 2 years ago that I did attend. Yes, so.
I'd be happy to support that.
For Wheatland County, it would be primarily just recognition through our social media or website, raising awareness. Any questions or discussion?
I don't remember honestly how I voted, but as in everything, you mature in life. Your ideas. Anybody that stays static is basically walking dead. So, and I will be voting against this, and it's not because it's for any other reason than it is not I don't believe it's government purview to be picking special days out because there's, like I said before, you could have a special day for every day. You could probably have 2 or 3 special days for every day. I do not think this is what I was elected to do, to decide what are special days and what's not. So that's where I'm at. Thank you.
Any other questions or discussion? Is any councillor opposed?
Yes, I am.
We'll do a roll call vote. Reeve Link is in favor. Deputy Reeve Clausen.
In favor.
Councillor Wilson.
In favor.
Councillor Bigger.
Favor?
Councillor Eichert.
Opposed?
Councillor Kester.
In favor.
Councillor Armstrong. Motion is carried. We'll move to 3.1, correspondence and information items.
Excuse me.
Bless you. 2 pieces of correspondence
Bless you again.
included in our council package. Correspondence received from Wheatland Housing Management Body regarding our letter regarding requisitions, and a letter from Ember Resources.
I'll move to have these correspondence for information.
Received for information.
Wow, that was difficult. Yeah.
Any questions or discussion? I'm fine with not following up further, but I do not feel that the letter from Wheatland Housing Management Body did address the questions that were raised around the alignment of the requisitioning with the legislation. And the Ember letter they're indicating that they're seeking joint ventures. We can address this following this motion, but I wasn't sure if it might be possible for me to potentially respond to Ember and just connect them perhaps with our Economic Development Board or our administration that works under Economic Development and Investment Attraction, just to facilitate any collaboration that might be able to happen. Of course, not limiting that to Ember, but having that be open to any companies or corporations that may come forward that are looking for kind of these joint venture opportunities. I don't think it would be a bad thing if we're aware that there are companies that are interested in that, if there is an opportunity to facilitate that through our staff, I think it could be good, particularly for the investment attraction in the region. I also might, with council's permission, or if there was direction to respond, reference Community Futures Wild Rose as well, because they also do a lot of work with businesses and kind of helping make connections and facilitate some of that collaboration that can help regions or help businesses be more successful. Any other
I
questions?
would think our economic development personnel would have that on their file, no different than any other business. It'd be an opportunity to partner with them or are available resources in the county that could be used in a joint venture. I think part of the economic development showcase, shall we say, should be part of their suite.
So there's a motion on the floor to accept for information. Is any councillor opposed? Motion is carried. Does council feel there's any need for further follow-up regarding the housing requisition?
What exactly are, do you have some concerns you can address specifically that you want to answer back to? I have, it's been toyed around a few times and I'd like clarification on if, I don't know how to word this, the housing body takes out a substantial loan for something, is the partners, how to say it, are we on the hook for the interest kind of thing? Oh, we asked that, you know what I was talking about.
So are you asking whether or not the interest on a loan
Yeah,
made by a housing body is requisitionable?
yeah.
I do not believe that question has been answered. I'm not, I think that,
Is that the best way to ask the question?
yeah.
Previously, when Wheatland Housing had a mortgage, it was just in our financial statement, and the requisition covered off the shortfall, shall we say, no different than today. Our requisitions basically cover the shortfall of the budget. I know it's not a deficit from a previous year, but if we didn't collect it, it would have been. So if you were to do a deficit, you would have to borrow the money, and all those expenses are requisitionable. Okay? If there's a new loan coming up, depending what the loan is for, if it's for operations, it's different than capital. I believe capital loans should be, substantial capital loans should be approved by the municipalities. I think that's in the new directive. But what the limits are, like some capital, like a computer, is different than capital for a new building, right? I don't know what the limits are.
Thanks, Glenn.
In terms of your question regarding concerns, I have outlined them previously. They haven't changed. I didn't see an indication of what reserves are set up in the Housing Board financials. I completely respect the timeline with the CAO indicating that the budget's prepared in January, while the LAP grant is calculated in February. And just the indication that if the board waits until the board approves the audited financial statements in March prior to establishing the annual requisitions, there would be a delay. So the Act does indicate that the requisition would be based on the previous years. annual deficit. So, and it is I think I've said this before, a little bit of a gray area around requisitioning for debt servicing. The Housing Act under requisitions says on or before April 30th, in any year, a management body that provides lodge accommodation may requisition those municipalities for which the management body provides lodge accommodation for A, the amount of the management body's annual deficit for the previous fiscal year arising from the provision of lodge accommodation. And so I think that's where some of the gray area is what that would include, the annual deficit for the previous fiscal year arising from the provision of lodge accommodation. And then there's the second clause, B, any amounts necessary to establish or continue a reserve fund for the management body. Now, we don't need to, rehash any of this. We have discussed it. I'm just expressing that I don't feel personally that the concerns that I have identified or expressed were addressed in the response. And recognizing the concern or the question that you were stating, and this is also just in recognition of some other concerns, and I believe they've been expressed here as well in previous councils, and again, we don't need to reiterate those. So I'm fine to just leave it. Perhaps the housing board representatives could I have no idea. That I'm at council's will, council's direction.
Can I ask a question? How would you like it done? Do you actually want or expect the housing board to accumulate debt on a budget? We can't pass a deficit budget. So how is it possible? The only deficit budget we do is for social housing. The only deficit budget I've ever passed in all the time as councillor. And that's mandated through the provincial government. We send that budget up to the provincial government and they decide how much money they're going to allocate to Wheatland housing. And this is strictly for social housing. And it includes operations, it includes windows, paint, anything for the maintenance of the buildings. So the lodge is owned by the municipalities. We have to pass a balanced budget. So how are we going to do that if you expect us to go into a deficit position so next year we can say, yeah, here's our debt, which is probably going to be very, very close to the current requisitions, especially if the housing management body decide to maybe make a reserve. I don't know how else to do it. Make a reserve for the accumulated debt that we can use that during the year, or do we have to go get a line of credit? Or just how, moving forward, do you think we can accomplish this? If we have to do a line of credit, there's going to be additional expenses and bank expenses, loan fees, and you'll end up paying exactly the same. I don't understand what you want.
So I would suggest it's not my responsibility to outline how this would be administered. My only thought was that as a municipality paying the requisition, I felt a duty and a responsibility that the requisition amount that we are being requisitioned be in alignment with the Alberta Housing Act. but I in no way intend to micromanage the operations of the lodge or the administration of it. That's not my responsibility, but we do have a responsibility as councillors for Wheatland County in paying a requisition. This is, I'm not speaking on behalf of council, this is clearly my personal opinion, that we have a responsibility to ensure that we are aligning with legislation that we are operating under, including the Alberta Housing Act. And certainly if there's an amendment or an update to the act or the regulation that I need to be aware of that has changed the requisitioning power that I was just referencing in the act, I welcome any information regarding that. To me, it's just my responsibility as a councillor in this municipality to ensure that what we're doing is in alignment with legislation. And it's not specific to the lodge at all. These are questions that I ask with many fiscal responsibilities we have as a municipality, and just part of the due diligence in ensuring that we are stewarding the tax dollars that are paid to us by our ratepayers responsibly and in compliance with legislation. But in terms of the practical application of that, I don't feel equipped to make any kind of statement about that. There are ways to do it, but that's certainly outside sort of our role as councillors to determine that. We do have some, strong financial expertise administratively, but I certainly don't have that as a municipal councillor. Where questions have arisen is where funds are being expended that are not being used for the provision of lodge accommodations that are potentially Wheatland County tax dollars that are being requisitioned by the board. Sorry.
So I share your concerns, Amber, and I'm just wondering, and so at RMA a year ago, there was a resolution brought forward about, because this is very ambiguous, like the Housing Act is very ambiguous on what you can do with, and I am 100, I do not believe there's any, malfeasance or anything.
Absolutely, I agree.
So we have a requisition of $450,000 or something like that, somewhere in that ballpark. But we do not know exactly what happens to that, right? And I think the ratepayers have the right to know exactly where that goes. Is the 450 just to cover all the debt, or does of the 450 does some of it go into a reserve that would, and all that kind of stuff? And I think we have to lobby the provincial government to make this clearer and how this can be done, because I agree with Glenn also that the fact that you can't run a deficit, so you're doing your best bet, yes, but we as county councillors have the fiduciary responsibility that we are only spending as much money as required on something like this. So I don't know. Can we reach out to whoever sponsored that resolution and see if they're going to reapply it? Because I honestly believe that no one understood I think they did a horrible job on representing it when they presented it, because I think it was a really good idea. It just didn't get any traction.
It was the MD of Greenview, and they also outlined as well that, and I believe I can find the reference in the act, but that the regulation does place limits on reserve funds, including a requirement for ministerial approval to establish reserves, and limits on the amounts of reserves in relation to the management body's estimated capital and operational costs. And yeah, they reference the lack of clarity that Councillor Eichert and Deputy Reeve Clausen have discussed, just regarding the scope of housing management body requisitions. They say specifically related to capital project costs. Whereas this lack of clarity has resulted in situations in which housing management bodies have attempted to requisition municipalities for capital costs, expenses based on the current year's budget, which is what we're seeing, and to contribute to reserve funds not approved by members, all of which do not align with the intent of the Act and regulation. Now, this resolution, as Councillor Eichert said, did not pass, but it just summarizes some issues that are being seen by some municipalities provincially. More specifically,
I can make a suggestion. Why maybe councillors on the board, the next housing board meeting, and bring the subject up. We don't have to go to RMA. Why not write a letter to Minister Pond and ask them if they have any concerns with Wheatland Housing and the money that's being requisitioned in the manner. I know we send our audited statements up to them every year and they go through them and they get it back. But we can ask these specific questions. Does it have to be a deficit? Is our reserves in line with, or whatever questions the board wants clarification on? Maybe that would be something we could do. I don't know. Like I say, our hands would be tied if we take it at a literal meaning that we have to do deficit financing. I don't know how to do it.
Typically do take legislation at its literal meaning. I think it would be the responsibility of the board members to, as you're reviewing your budgets and your requisitioning process, to ensure that it is aligned with the legislation. I don't think we need Minister Pond to tell us that we should be following the legislation that's in place. I think if there were to be advocacy to have the Act changed, that's a separate issue that would need to be discussed. But our housing board exists under the authority of the Housing Act and is compelled to follow the Act as it's written, recognizing that, and I'm with Tom, Councillor Eichert, I'm in no way suggesting any ill intent or that this is done intentionally or anything like that. I'm looking at it from our responsibility as councillors and as a former board member, just as due diligence on that board to ensure that there is alignment with the legislation. And there are larger issues at hand that could have potential fiscal impacts to our ratepayers that we have larger, that makes this a more critical issue, I would say, for Wheatland.
And not just for us then, if it's a problem with the Act, everybody else is going to have, they may have not come across any, but apparently another municipality did have some problems with the way it's written.
From my read, Greenview's issue wasn't necessarily, so the operative clause was not necessarily advocating, I'll just read it. Do you guys want to hear it? Do you care?
Go ahead.
What Greenview was asking was that RMA request the Government of Alberta review the oversight of the Ministry of Seniors and Housing over housing management bodies to ensure that all housing management bodies are correctly and consistently requisitioning municipalities under the requirements of the Housing Act. And further, that RMA requests that the Government of Alberta provide enhanced training and education to housing management bodies on the Housing Act and the Management Body Operation and Administration Regulation to ensure they have a clear understanding of their financial powers, limitations, and responsibilities, including related to requisitioning and reserve creation, and further be it resolved that RMA request the Government of Alberta to amend the Housing Act to clearly state the ability of municipalities to approve or deny requests for capital projects. So they were not advocating for a change to the act, but instead for essentially oversight
And
of the
And training.
and training.
I think the training part would be so so beneficial to know what is the correct way to do that, because that is what is the problem at issue here is we do not know the correct way to do it. How do we get in compliance with the law? And we have to be, or we should be in compliance with the law. I don't think there's an excuse just because we've been doing something wrong for 30 years that you can continue doing that. You know, at some point we have to get in compliance. And I just don't know how to do that. Like, I don't know who's got the expertise to tell us how to do that. So, like, it would have been so nice if this resolution would have passed, because it answers a lot of the questions.
From what I'm hearing, it's more the act needs to be clarified, so I don't know how we go about that other than advocacy.
To me, the act is clear, and I don't want to get into it, but there are ways to comply with the act that would not necessarily cost money.
Gotcha.
I just, because I'm not certified, I'm not like this, I'm not in this seat as a finance person, and I don't want to pretend to be, but there are fiscally efficient ways for the board to operate the Housing Management Board that would align with the act. And I think steps that may need to be taken to ensure that reserves are appropriately set up and in place. And have stated this before, I absolutely agree with contributing to a reserve. I think it's critical for long-term planning and sustainability of the lodge and the operations and the provision of those services, those critical services. It is some potential significant expenses. And as Councillor Eichert said, I think I've said it in here before, when we know better, we need to make an effort to do better. And that's across the board, you know, like our procedure bylaw, I tried to do better, you know, like I try and follow it. When Councillor Wilson raises an objection, you know, to a motion, I try and do better when I recognize I'm about to make an error, right? Like, could be, and there's other boards where questions have arisen, things that have been done long-term that were not necessarily being done as well as they could be, and we adjust and, you know, improve processes. This is not targeted. They are such a valuable, like, I love the lodge. I'm so grateful to the housing board and the work that you do. My grandmother is living in the lodge, and, you know, it is such a blessing to know the care that she receives there and that all of our seniors receive there. So it's nothing about that. It's about, set that aside. It's about, as Councillor Eichert referenced, our fiduciary responsibility as councillors for Wheatland County.
So I'm hearing just because it was done that way forever doesn't mean you have to do it the proper way, I guess. Or how do we do it the proper way?
So can you request training?
And I don't know if this was part of the recent amendments into whenever it was just recently. The act was changed somewhat. I'm not advocating that that's the way we've always done it. At some time, maybe that's the way it was done. I don't know. When these changes come into, or when the act was changed, was not that long ago. I believe it was the previous minister's name to it.
The act that I referenced, that I read the requisitioning requirements from, is from the Queen's Printer, and it does indicate it's current as of December 31st, 2019. Typically, when I have referenced acts that have been amended, like, that's indicated that they've been repealed and replaced by a different piece of legislation. So I do believe that this is the revised statutes of Alberta 2000, Chapter A25, current as of December 31st, 2019, and it is the one that is currently available.
Yeah, so it is quite possible it's only 2 years old, that It's not 30 years old. I will ask some questions.
Yeah, and please don't take it like absolutely what Tom referenced. I do not believe there is any ill intent or any, nothing like that. I am honestly overwhelmed with gratitude for the work that our board does and that the Lodge does and the social housing does. It is a critical and heart-filled service that happens for our seniors. So I can leave it, I'll leave it with our board representatives. I'm happy to review, any of how I interpret things or understand things, and certainly if there's an update to legislation that I'm not aware of, please do make me aware of it, because I would genuinely appreciate that. So we'll leave that. We accepted it as information. Perhaps we can review it, at a future date. The only reason I raised the potential response to Ember is just because it was a specific letter to myself, which obviously is to council. And I think because they have gone to the effort to reach out, that I would really like to respond to that. Perhaps in addition to that response, we could just give some direction to administration that any future inquiries like this, even if they come through administration, that the same steps could happen. We could, connect that company to our investment attraction and economic development specialists, that we could connect them, ensure that they're aware of community futures, and have administration just work at that level of facilitating any collaboration that would be beneficial.
I think we should send them a letter back thanking them, or because it was directed to yourself, and direct them to the proper staff and or economic development people that put them in touch with them.
Can I make that a motion?
I can make that as a motion.
Any questions or discussion? So I think Deputy Reeve is moving that we write a letter in response outlining just essentially what we discussed, connections with administration, appropriate administration, or regional organizations that could help facilitate. Is that?
Sorry, did we, that's my motion about accepting
We did.
correspondence? We did. I apologize.
Margaret, I believe I called that the resolution or the motion passed.
Yes, we did.
It's good you ask, because it's highly possible that we did not. Deputy Reeve Clausen has a motion. Any questions or discussion? Is any councillor opposed? Motion is carried. We do have one closed session item. I will move that we go into closed session. Is any councillor opposed? Motion is carried.
Call recording and transcription are turned off. The organizer has ended this Uber conference. Goodbye.